Dear Finn, I'm wishing you a fun week with your aunt and cousins in Spain. I wish I could hug you goodbye this year, but work's loaded, so I can't be home when you leave. But you'd be embarrassed by that, wouldn't you? Anyway, don't drink too much and come home safe. Love you, and see you next week. Mom.
I need to come to terms with the first game I made. Psychic Isolation is a game I made back in 2017, and have ever since acted like it doesn't even exist. This video will be painful for me, and if you see this, then I guess I won the inner struggle and actually uploaded it. So let's talk about the game first. Psychic Isolation is a game that is basically Slender Man, in different. Personally, I am a big fan of dread in games. Dread is such a strong and varied emotion that I just can't help but be drawn to it. Among my favorite titles are games like Soma, Omori, Undertale, Nier Automata, and of course The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Psychic Isolation was supposed to be an episodic, narrative horror game that should also evoke the emotion of dread in players. A game about people who have been infected by a poison that makes them hallucinate, that isolates them psychologically. People with seemingly normal lives, nice people, being affected by poison to drive them into madness that they can't differentiate between reality and hallucination anymore. This would ultimately lead them to either try to fight for their lives, or succumb to it and commit suicide. Additionally, depending on whether the player turns off the steam in the basement, they would become infected as well. So the game was supposed to branch into two different story paths, either as a survivor or as a victim that hallucinates as well as they slowly kill their family. The motivation behind this was that I wanted players to have different experiences as they play, that two people could talk about it and realize that they experienced two completely different games. The first path was Grounded, a normal horror game, with enemies chasing you down, you having to hide and solve puzzles. The second path was me messing with the player, the areas bending and dissolving, confusing the player. I wanted the player to wonder why they were suddenly on the first floor in the hospital despite having wandered on the second floor for a bit. But I also wanted them not to realize that they turned into the antagonist. And the funny thing is, I even have a working prototype of this. Almost the entire second episode is playable, both infected and uninfected. I spent thousands of dollars on voiceovers, assets, and art pieces for the second episode. Yet, I never finished it because I could not bear to look at the first one. And the reason for that is simple. It had no game loop except for being a prettier version of Slender Man. But here I am, 8 years later, and trying to come to terms with it, due to reasons that turned this game from a dream into a curse. So, let's talk development. Psychic Isolation started development in February of 2015. Back then it was mostly me playing around in the Unity engine for fun. I had no intention to make a horror game at first, but something about the environments I set up were kind of unsettling to me. Even so much that I was scared walking around in the house I built despite not having added any mechanics yet. That was around the same time I got friends with Luigi Kid Gaming. I saw that he likes to play .exe games, and this came in quite nicely for me as I was messing around with something that was unsettling to me. Also, a quick note, everything you see from here on out are old builds of Psychic Isolation. I backed up literally every build I made for documentation purposes, and this comes in handy now. But back to 2015. When I saw that Luigi Kid liked those type of games, I knew I wanted to make a rather cheap but effective horror game. That was also around the same time I heard about Five Nights at Freddy's 4, which honestly was the first time I even heard about the game series. So with this, my idea was simple. A horror game where you have to keep closing the doors behind you, or you lose when you try to enter the room again. I had no idea about anything really, and it was rough to say the least. I sent him the build in hopes that he would play it and got shut down that there is nothing one could really call a game yet. Fair enough, there really wasn't. So I deleted the entire project and started from scratch. This time, I wanted to add a proper story, and this is when the entire thing started to shape the dream and the curse at the same time. I restarted development with more polish in mind, and I had the skills now to make something I could be proud of. I thought. God, I'm an idiot. So this is where I started adding the component that I was told I was fairly talented in as a child: writing. Am I though? No idea, but I love writing, and I decided to make the story a crucial part of the game. So originally I came up with a story that really just had one goal: don't be the same as those slop games on Steam. All of those demos were either without story altogether, or the main character had amnesia, and that's basically it. So I started to create the interior of the building and started working on the mechanics, the progression, and the story. The problem, however, is nobody cares if your story is good if your game sucks. This is, however, where my so-called curse really started to take shape. Nobody told me that the game is bad. And maybe it isn't, and I was and am still just too hard on myself. Hi, this is post-recording Thiefbug here. Nope, the game still sucks. So I decided another prototype, and this time I wanted to be serious about it. Eventually I had a build that I considered decent. Nothing too fancy, but something that did the job in my eyes. This time the game focused on the aspect of horror games that is the most terrifying in my eyes: sound. In my ears. Oh my god, I couldn't help it, but at the pun. The player needs to focus on the sound to determine whether he is safe or not, and that mechanic alone made it almost impossible for me to play. However, there is another problem. Due to the way the story shaped itself, which was out of necessity rather than genuine interest of a story, I decided to shape a story that took elements from my own childhood. And I need to add a quick explanation here. I grew up with a single mother in a wheelchair. I don't know what it's like to have a father at home, so I couldn't write one. Additionally, I don't know how grown-up, seemingly responsible women dress in their home, as my own mother never left home and thus was always in her pajamas. This ultimately led to the design and the setting: fatherless and a mother in her pajamas. Unfortunately, the mother also resembles my own mother visually. It's not a close match, but you'd know if you knew my family. This combination brought up the biggest flaw of my development journey. I could not play the game myself. I had several people playtest the build and got positive feedback, further reinforcing that I should give it a shot. And I did. Somewhat. I submitted the build to Steam Greenlight. Steam Greenlight used to be the system to determine whether your game is allowed in the Steam library. People could vote on games and demos whether they want a full release or not. And while I had a slow start, eventually it started to pick up. The game finished the voting with a couple of thousands of wishlists and positive votes, right behind a game you might have heard of: Heartbound by Pirate Software. In retrospect, this was another problem. I was too inexperienced and fought too much with insecurities to capitalize on this. I used to be a streamer at the time who earned his living from streaming speedruns, so I had the perfect setup and completely and utterly screwed it up due to me not wanting to explain why I made yet another horror game among these other thousands of horror games on Steam that all suck. But I kept at it. I hired a voiceover artist on Fiverr and had her voice the mother in the game. Frankly, she completely blew it out of the park. Her performance was beyond and above everything I expected.
I wish you never came back. But not even your aunt likes you enough to endure your ugly face for more than a week. No one I ever met could stand it for longer than a few days without throwing up. I'll end this now. No one will hear you now.
Right around the same time of the Steam Greenlight process, a company reached out to me, the publisher of the game Dear Esther. Don't know if you heard of it? It's quite the big deal. And they wanted to work with me to publish my game. And I declined. But after that, I was finally allowed to create a Steam page. And that was also the same time I was introduced to a friend back then, Nocthrulus, who unfortunately died to an embolism back in 2022. Nocthrulus looked at my game and decided to help me. He started building the entire environment and made it more believable. He asked me about the hobbies of the characters, who they were, so he could build a somewhat believable apartment under the given circumstances. Around the same time, I also started working a little bit with Slask, another speedrunner who specialized in sound design. He introduced me to Fmod, and suddenly the game had a scope that I could not keep up with. I didn't work as a programmer back then, as I was still a speedrunner and I was streaming for roughly 8 hours a day in order to pay my rent and have something to eat. But with this, it was time to remake the game again, for a third time. And all of this led to my first burnout. Considering I streamed for 8 hours a day, was still a college student, and tried to live up to the expectations others had of me, and the even worse expectations I set for myself. I tried really freaking hard, but eventually my mind was only filled with the thought of, get this done. Nocthulus rightfully started complaining that he's doing everything and I'm not doing anything. It wasn't a dream anymore, it was a nightmare. I didn't care about mechanics anymore, I just wanted it to get over with. I still loved the story, the notes were something that deeply resonated with me back then, so I rewrote some text and had them voiced over again. But I was tired. I couldn't do anything anymore without feeling physically sick and like I was on the verge of throwing up. Streaming became a chore, and I only did it to earn money, to provide food for myself, and this reflected in the numbers as the view count kept dropping. I decided that the game is my last hope. But I also didn't want to be known as someone who tried to make crappy horror games and was so disillusioned to believe that it was good. Eventually, I did put the game on Steam Early Access though. Around this time, the prototypes, art, and voiceover for episode 2 were already done. I casted talent, J. Michael Collins, who worked on advertisements but also a few mini-TV series, as the voice for the second episode.
They want to get rid of me and my family. I won't let them do this. Just so they leave my family alone. Just so they leave all these innocent people alone. So there he was, dead, drenched in his own blood.
I got positive feedback from the few testers I had, especially on the infected part of the game, as the mind-bending elements seemed to have worked out fairly well, but the damage had been done. I couldn't open the project anymore. I couldn't meet my own standards. There have been so many elements that needed improvement, so I stopped working on it. And with no advertisement whatsoever, I decided that this was the time for me to look for a job. I couldn't deal with anything anymore that was related to that time I worked on the game. I was overwhelmed. I constantly thought that if people saw the way I have shown myself online, that nobody would like me. Someone who prostitutes himself for money on Twitch. Someone so delusional that they put a cheap and horrible game onto Steam. Eventually, I decided to turn things around completely and try to hide this part of my life. Every now and then people contacted me that bigger YouTubers played the game and kinda liked it. Hi, post-recording Thiefbug here again. Not exactly like, more as in, could have potential. Big difference. But I still couldn't bear the thought of continuing to work on it. Everything about it just made me want to disappear. Even the thought of it made me feel weak, irritable, and sick. So I just let it sit. Not doing it justice, not doing Nocthulus justice, and not doing myself justice. In that time, the game accumulated roughly around $1,200 as I lowered the price from $7 to $1. And with this, I locked up everything about my past away for several years. Until today. I picked up game development as a hobby again, and as you can see with my current project, A Place Once Warm, this allowed me to mentally open the door to my last project again. A door I closed for almost 8 years. I can now look at it and see at least a glimpse of what I created. A project too ambitious that still kept its spirit to a certain degree. A game containing texts that I wrote from my soul to express the pain I felt. A game I will come back to and tell the story I wanted to tell. This time will not be now, but hopefully at some point in the future. The last 7 years of working full-time as a developer have shown me that the path or routine isn't one for me, but they have also shown me that I'm capable. I am capable to adapt and adjust as needed. I achieved an unknown dream before, but back then it happened due to a fortunate mix of necessity and hyperfocus. This time, I will decide where the road goes. This time, I will fight with every cell in my body to get where I want to be. I didn't know it back then, but psychic isolation was one of the many steps for me to get to where I am now. I learned a lot through the creation of this game, and without it, I wouldn't have even have the understanding of programming as I do now. I'm not relying on unstable income anymore. I have a stable job that I can maintain, and I have enough energy to chase a dream, even if it's little by little. And with this, I need to acknowledge that psychic isolation is not a burden, but that it was an opportunity. An opportunity to see what I can and can't do. An opportunity to learn how many cogs need to work together to form a machine. An opportunity to come to terms with myself and the piece of my soul I left behind in this game. And with this, thank you for watching. Also, on a slight little note, My second game, A Place Once Warm, will get its Steam page in September once I have the money together for a capsule artist. The asset store sale basically ate my wallet for breakfast. My current plan is to have a demo by mid-October and release is planned for February, but if I don't feel like working on it for a while, then I won't. I'm not gonna force myself to produce something I can't even look at again. So, yeah, see ya!